Hey, so I'm back. It's been a long time. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I got really busy, long semester. I actually made a video and was having like a bunch of problems with like the software and everything. And then I like was editing it and then accidentally deleted it and like half of the videos that we had on my hard drive. And then I was just like, fuck it. I'm not getting paid for this. And I have a million other things to do. But as you may be able to tell from the beard, I am very much on vacation right now. So someone asked us to come back, and I was like, all right. So I'm going to just get into it. We're gonna put on some video, and I'm gonna analyze it because I guess that's what you guys like. Please, for the love of God, if you have any suggestions other than PF, like throw it in. But it is what it is, you know. Paul and I were both very busy guys. We got a lot of stuff to do, but at the end of the day, this seems to be, we've recognized this as being an area of need for the community, and being people who can try to fill that need, we're happy to do it. And like a couple people I've run into at tournaments have been like, "You're that Proteus guy," and that was like a little bit of an ego stroke. So I'm doing it for the ego stroke. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is Millburn CZ versus Walt Whitman MM TOC semis. Someone asked that I do this one. I don't know anything about either school or either team. I don't know what the topic is. I don't know who wins. I don't think this is the one that I watched and abandoned. Though the other one was a request also, and I'll probably get back to it later.
Everybody ready?
Doesn't look familiar.
Millburn affirms the contention one is technological innovation. There are two ways H-1B visas.
Okay, so H-1B, cool. AFA's going first. Cool, love that. Something innovation, technological innovation. Okay.
Create innovation and the first through STEM productivity. America has a STEM job crisis. The American Economy 17 found that there were 17 STEM job openings for each position actually filled. Fortunately, H-1B visas bring in 85,000 skilled workers each year to fill the gap. Jennifer Hunt of the Institute for the Study of Labor 09 finds that immigrants that produce patents at double the native rate, and a 1% increase in immigrant workers increases patent production by 15%. Innovation driven by immigrant companies generates long-term economic growth. Giovanni Perry of the National Bureau of Economic Research 14 concludes that increasing foreign STEM workers increases domestic productivity by 50%, and a 1% increase in foreign STEM workers increases native wages by 8% and job growth by 4%.
There's nothing wrong with this really so far. You want to start out by describing that the status quo is bad and that the mechanism you're advocating for has precedence for improving it. Public forum doesn't really have plan texts. If I recall, this one was like increase the number of H-1B visas, and so without plan text, like what does that mean? What are you increasing it to? But I think you're establishing some strong precedents here for why H-1Bs have been, helpful. So, sure.
Second is STEM training grants. Neil Ruiz of the Brookings Institute 16 finds that $1 billion from employees' H-1B visas fees fund programs that address the skills shortages in the U.S. workforce. About half of these funds go to fund the Department of Labor's technical skills training, while the other half go to the National Science Foundation. These grants are essential. Linda Levine of Cornell University 05 finds that the NSF awarded around $190 million to the H-1B program to colleges and universities to provide scholarships to low-income, academically talented students. Contention 2 is Indian development. H-1B visas are restricted to 6 years, and becoming a permanent resident is incredibly difficult. Ishani Dattagupta of the Economic Times 17 writes that the USCIS receives over 1 million green card applications a year from H-1B countries, but only 5,000 get accepted. This forces 1.5 million Indian immigrants on the backlog to wait up to 75 years to have their applications processed. Further, returning to India is becoming a more attractive option. Raghu Kumar of the NDTV 13 finds that 61% of returning immigrants found higher level positions than in the US, and 79% found growing demand for their skills.
So, not that there's anything wrong with these cards inherently, but I kind of don't like that I don't see where this argument is going yet. You want your arguments to flow naturally, right? I mean, it's not really any different from how you would structure of persuasive speech, right? Like a problem exists, here is the mechanism, and then what are the mechanism for the problem existing, right? Or the mechanism for the solution having whatever, and then what does the application look like? So far I'm getting that immigration to the U.S. is hard, but also not attractive. An H-1B is a non-immigrant visa. It can turn into the ability to apply for an immigrant visa for a lot of people or under different conditions. But we'll, see where this goes.
All of this is why Josh Parkinson of Mother Jones 13 finds that only 3% of H-1B workers apply to become permanent workers, and instead many choose to return home to their families.
Sounds pretty defensive. Is your argument that this is going to, help India? We take people with these expertise from India, bring them to the United States, and then send them back to India, and then somehow they've, become better or benefited more? What's the argument here? It seems like you're probably making a very defensive argument, anticipating a brain drain, and just saying how the brain drain doesn't actually happen, but I doubt this is going to take out any brain drain cards, because H-1Bs have been happening, and any evidence that reads about brain drain in the status quo, you just have to say that these people are just factually wrong, which, if you had that card, you wouldn't need the preempt. So let's see where this goes.
Ultimately, America's H-1B workers become India's entrepreneurs. Rajini Vaidyanathan of BBC News 11 finds that many Indians use H-1B visas to gain management experience before returning home to start their own companies, contributing to India becoming the fastest growing startup ecosystem in the world. Further, Vivek Wadaya of VentureBeat 11 quantifies that over 50% of H-1B workers use connections with their American colleagues to exchange information about customers, technology, and business strategies. Joan Dason 16 writes in her book Pathways to Social Change that entrepreneurs and engineers are gaining new skills and high-level degrees prior to their return, and that's why overall, Kumar confirms that over half of Indian returnees come back to India to start new businesses of their own.
It's fine. The impacts of contention 1 and 2 just sort of fall flat, right? I want to know, who is this impact affecting? How many of these people are there? How significant a change is it making in their lives? Part of the annoying thing about the high school debate demographic, for lack of a better word, is that there seems to just be certain things that are taken for granted. And I coach very young students now, middle school and some elementary school, in a very affluent area, and it's kind of gross the way they talk about money, just taken for granted that that's the only thing that means anything in life. And they talk about you're either you go to Harvard or you're homeless. Anyway, I want to hear that explanation, right? I'm a little disheartened thinking that probably the other side isn't going to try to come out the gate with some other kind of impact and read outweigh arguments, though I would. When I had a negative case for this, the brain drain argument wasn't about the economy, and it wasn't about India. It was about the medical impact that this has on places in Africa with Ebola outbreaks and shit. And that's a pretty strong impact story, right? It's already one doctor per however many thousands of people in these areas, and any one doctor you bring over is now a higher risk for a disease outbreak in these areas. Is it the highest probability argument? Probably not, but the magnitude of it is a pretty clear win over now these engineers don't have to take an online class to learn how to, be businessmen, or they won't learn like everyone else in the world did as they became like Japan didn't have an H-1B program in the 50s and 60s and 70s, but somehow they managed to become a massive whatever. Point being that all of these impacts are as like a granted. Oh, business. Oh, the engineers, and maybe it's because I was a philosophy major, but I just don't give a shit about the engineers. Like, we have a better economy than ever, allegedly, right now, and people are miserable, and everything is terrible. So, I don't know. I'm just sort of over it. And there's a lot of evidence that goes into the idea that GDP growth is a useless analytic for measuring the welfare of a country, or even the strength of an economy. Like measuring your domestic growth is one thing you could look at, but I think we massively overblow it in terms of how strong an indicator it is of economic strength. Anyway.
There are 3 ways that entrepreneurs reduce poverty, and the first is by bolstering the backbone. The Obama Corporation 17 finds that small businesses in India fuel the economy, employing 2/3 of India's workforce and accounting for 45% of manufacturing demand. Creating startups in India increases demand for manufacturing jobs, which is critical because Partha Sen of the Delhi School of Economics 10 explains that the only way to reduce poverty in India is through the creation of manufacturing jobs.
Yeah, but you're not telling me what the status quo of poverty in India is, right? Like, what you need to describe is some sort of deficit that exists. You're telling me right now they supplied 2/3 of the backbone, and then we create more? Does that fill the other third? What does the other third look like? What does the 2/3 that have jobs look like? I don't know the story, right? Like, I'm not picturing something in my head. I'm not imagining, like, okay, I'm a person who lives in India right now and shit sucks, and then the AF happens and now things seem better. Like, that's what I need to be able to imagine. In other words, what you want for the judge to be able to picture is they wake up tomorrow morning and your plan has happened, and you need to describe to them how their lives are different this morning, or how the world around them is different this morning. And a lot of that comes down to, like, people are bad at impacts. I rag on this impact all the time, but people are like, it's what the founding fathers would have wanted. Like, if I woke up tomorrow morning and the country was more like how the founding fathers would have wanted, how would I know? I probably wouldn't, and that indicates that that impact does not interact with human lives and their experiences in any significant way. So why are we really prioritizing it? So, it's not that poverty and solving for it isn't important. I said you need to explain that story to me, and you're starting to, but I still don't know, like, what is the status quo bad argument? You need to demonstrate to me that there is a deficiency in H-1B visas that is causing harm. And that harm story, I can kind of infer what it is, but I also don't know how you solve for that inference.
Second is by driving innovation. Because of their experience, William Kerr of the Harvard Business School 14 writes that Indian returnees contribute significantly more to innovation than domestic inventors do. Bindu Gupta of the Institute of Management Technology 14 finds that Indian small businesses are incredibly innovative, with over 80% of them improving existing products and 65% producing new products. Bhairav Khanna of the Center for Global Development 17 confirms that the returning workforce is the driving force in India's rapid IT sector expansion, and the resulting growth has lowered the cost of products while increasing their quality.
You use the word products like 10 times. What are we talking about? Like, what kind of products? What are they used for? Why are they good? You decrease the cost, and if I'm imagining that they're products that are basic needs for everyone, I can infer that that alleviates some poverty. But one, that's a lot of inference, and two, like, those products are your impact, and that allows you access to talking about something other than just the economy. Are they medical innovations? Like, what are they? Like, tell me what they are, read me some examples, and then tell me that there's some inherency. In other words, some barrier to, like, better innovations happening. What sounds like the status quo is great. Like, I still don't understand, like, what the need here is. And I understand that, sure, like, things are good right now, but why wouldn't we want them to get better? That's fine. But if the negative team comes up and outlines some really fragile aspects of how our H-1B system is set up right now, and how you disrupt that balance and potentially cause major ramifications, all they need to say is, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So I guess this works, but only against a inexperienced team that doesn't really know how to turn status quo good into a win for the negative.
Third is by increasing wages. Nicholas Morales of the Center for Global Development 16 finds that returnees bring back new technology and the training needed to use it, raising productivity in the IT sector, which has raised wages across the board by 1%. Overall, Scott Gilmore of the Globe and Mail concludes that entrepreneurship is driving the growth necessary to lift a quarter of India's population out of poverty, and Ravish Singh of the International Journal of Humanities finds that the Indian diaspora produces the equivalent of 30% of India's GDP. Thus, we affirm.
Okay, it's fine.
Yeah.
Seems like pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward case. Nothing stunning.
The one second to last who says it'll lift a quarter of the lake.
Yeah.
And I don't mean stunning like he's not a great speaker or those cards weren't well prepared. I just mean I'm not surprised. That the strategy seems very cookie cutter, very straight down the middle. Let's see. What am I looking at here? Oh, they're like prepping and looking at cards and stuff. Oh. All right.
Is everyone ready? We negate resolve. The U.S. federal government should increase its quota of H-1B visas. Our sole contention is the high-skilled exodus. Gone of BC 2017 rates that H-1B visas have allowed for more highly skilled foreign workers to migrate and work in the U.S., most of whom are from India. An increase in the quota would worsen this trend.
See, I wouldn't talk about India. In fact, so for this, I was working for an academy at the time. They had me cut a case for this, work with some kids to get them ready for middle school, for first to state champs and then national champs. And Paul will go into this story, and he has a lot of emotions about what happened. But basically, we wrote this case for them that basically said all this stuff, but didn't. It was what I talked about earlier. And they went, I think, undefeated at state, and then they went to nationals, and everything was going good. We weren't there, but, you know, the updates we got sounded like they were doing well. And then we got a notification that someone had, like, changed things in the Dropbox. So Paul goes and looks at it and sees that they just, like, took a bunch of stuff out randomly and then put in a bunch of new cards that talked about India. And he, like, texted them and was like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, what's the story? And didn't hear back. And then later on, they, like, lost in sems or something, like whatever their next round was. And then he finally got a hold of them, and they're like, yeah, sorry, we changed the case. And he was like, it's fine, like, what happened? He was like, yeah, we were talking to some people, and I don't know if it was, like, other competitors or coaches or whatever, and we were talking to some people, and they said that, like, we should really talk more about India. So we just took out some stuff and changed it with some stuff about India. And, like, I understand that because, you know, you're a young kid and you're at this tournament and everyone is saying something. And, like, how do you know whether your coaches that prep this thing know better than all of these people? We do. But I guess they don't know that. But it was like, we're like, there's no Ebola in India. Like, the entire case, you can't just... Anyway. The point being, when you're not being predictable but still being clearly on topic is a major asset, because then people don't have a million cards against you. So in terms of the skill deficit or whatever, India said that H-1Bs is like the heart of U.S.-Indian like relations. So I don't think India sees it as a bad thing. And additionally, you're not defending no H-1B. You're not defending H-1B bad. You're defending current H-1B. Unless I'm mistaken, the resolution was increasing H-1B, right? So, like, you're defending keeping it the same. You're not running a counter plan. So I think just going in and saying that this is hurting India is both very predictable. They probably have answers against it, but also like not really defending the status quo being good in any meaningful way.
Stripping India of its high-skilled labor force. Indeed, most Indians that come to the United States do not return home. Scott of the University of Colorado.
Let me just clear that up. In debate, the affirmative changes the status quo, meaning that the affirmative has to say that the status quo is bad in order for us to want to change it. The negative is not changing the status quo. Thus, they want to show that the status quo is good. For them to say, for example, the negative to say that the status quo is bad but you make it even worse is what we would call a linear disadvantage, a linear argument, and it's not terribly persuasive for a lot of reasons. But yeah, so that's what I'm complaining about here, right? The affirmative isn't really establishing why things need to change, and the negative is not really establishing why things don't need to change. So all you're really doing is just testing the cards. But that's not really what debate is about. And we have a lot of videos about this, but really the debate is won or lost based on whether you convince someone the status. Oh, I guess I didn't make a video about this. I was like, oh, this one is like the most important video, so I should put a lot of effort into it. And so then I never made it. Well, more to come on this later. But really, the way human beings make decisions and choose whether or not to take a risk is less based on the evidence of what the outcomes are likely to be and more based on their perception of whether their situation is good right now or bad right now. And the worse it is, the more likely they are to be motivated to make a change. That's what the affirmative needs to make the judges feel, and that's what the negative wants to not make them feel. And I'm not really getting that yet. But let's go into it.
2006 finds that more than 50% of H-1B visa holders have become permanent U.S. residents. And this is because, as Gone 2017 explains, high-skilled migrants likely have higher pay in the United States, causing reluctance to ever return home. This gap widens every year as more immigrants leave but fewer return home. So Lomano of the World Bank 2002 finds that every year 1,500 highly qualified Indians return from the United States. Meanwhile, another 45,000 left, about 30 times the number of returnees. Gone 2017 concludes that India lacks the critical mass of returnees that would help to improve the Indian technology sector to become internationally competitive. But even if all the new visa holders eventually return home, raising the quota means that there will always be a larger proportion of India's high-skilled labor force abroad, which has disastrous effects for the Indian economy.
Okay, this is a lot of problems with this argument. The first is that you're not demonstrating a propensity in the status quo for a lot of these people to return home. So it seems like the damage is already done. And if the status quo is all in all good, then it seems like it's not that big a deal. The second argument is the second problem is I think this argument is just bad. Like, I think it's really easy to tear this apart in cross-X. Like, okay, so say I'm in India and I want to be in the United States. I want a better life. I want to move my family somewhere with a less racist, less religiously oppressive government. Like, what you're saying is I just should not be allowed. I should be trapped in India. I don't know as much about India. I know a little bit about the protests and stuff going on right now, but let's talk about Iran. Like, I'm an immigrant. My dad came here not on an H-1B exactly. He came over on one of the other, like, genius. I assure you it's too flattering. But one of the other visas, and then we came on, like, H-4s or something. Like, you're saying the world's, like, better if I'm stuck in Iran? Like, a country where, like, I'd get killed for not being Muslim? How is this the argument? How is your defense like we should keep people trapped in places when they want to leave, right? The argument isn't you take someone out of the area when they want to stay. They apply for these visas, right? They're not being forced to go. There's some, like, being forced to go arguments that you can make on the H-4s. And there's some arguments that you can make, as we did, that was like, hey, even if you want to leave and that's your right and that's really important, it doesn't change the damage you're doing to these people, right? But I think with an Ebola outbreak, that is easier to prove than, like, the economy or innovation or whatever. That stuff just matters so much less in the world than I don't know, people give it credit for. So anyway, I don't love this argument. I'm not sure how it demonstrates a good status quo. And also it seems like it's a pretty problematic thing to insist that people need to stay miserable because they were born in the wrong place, and that's just the way it is.
Of the Harvard Business Review 2017 writes that in the 1990s, the U.S. contained around 30% of India's software labor force. Increasing the quota of H-1B visas would ensure that India has a dearth of skilled labor, which harms the economy. Ismail of U Malaysia 2013 writes that the outflow of highly skilled workers is detrimental to the country because the productivity of human capital depends on total employment. High skilled migration hinders modernization and slows structural change, a crucial feature of development. Having such a shortage of high-skilled workers devastates the Indian economy in three specific ways. The first is reducing foreign direct investment. GON 2017 explains that the flight of some of the country's most high-skilled workers can make the countries look less appealing to foreign direct investment. This prevents growth and development of high-technology clusters. Kugler of the University of Southampton 2000 empirically finds a 1% increase in the emigration of workers with secondary education to the U.S. is associated with a 3.
What is a high-technology cluster? Like, I know what those words mean, but, like, we're just throwing it out. It has not expanded on in any way. It has no relation to anyone's lives. What does it do? Why does it matter, right? Like, we're just throwing out economy, technology, because a lot of these kids are from the Silicon Valley, and they're just told that the two things that matter in this world are the economy and technology. That's mean. I don't know who these people are, and I also don't presume that these arguments reflect any sort of problems with their outlooks in life. But I'm just trying to be honest as what I would be thinking sitting in the round. And granted, I'm not these parent judges, and I don't think the way they do, and maybe they're eating this shit up right now. But I don't know. I think it's... what I will say is that I'm glad college debate is different than this.
Information and services financed with FDI from the U.S. to the migrant origin country. Because FDI creates local job opportunities and provides resources to increase productivity, Tiari of the University of East London 2009 finds a one...
I'm recording this, right? Because then I'll just actually kill myself. No, we're good. Hey, and it's not too dark outside yet. You can kind of see what's going on in here. Okay, we're back.
Percent increase in FDI increases average incomes of workers by 10 to 13%. India must retain a large, high-skilled population to attract the FDI needed to create lasting economic opportunities. Second is destroying economic growth. Singh of USCB explains that since the most educated people from India migrate to advanced industrialized countries in their most productive years, it creates an exodus of educated citizens. The Indian economy will suffer since scarce resources were spent to educate these individuals, since most universities are heavily subsidized by the government. The government loses their investment in educating high-skilled youth who do not contribute back into the economy. Ravish S. of the IFHSSI 2013 finds that India loses $2 billion a year because of the emigration of computer experts to the United States. This ultimately harms growth, as Gosard of the University of Balearic Islands 2004 finds a 10 percentage point increase in human capital flight reduces per capita growth rates by around 0.8% each year.
Like, if it's so bad for India, why doesn't the government in India oppose it in any way? Why are they like, if you take away the H-1B visas, we will see that as an act of war?
In a world without this economic decline, poverty in India would go down. Because growth generates more economic opportunities, the DID finds a 1 percentage point or a 1% increase in per capita.
This is also a great example of why you don't want to just have one impact, because now you got cards on each side. Oh, the economy will go up, the economy will go down. Sounds like it's a wash, right? Like, hopefully I'm not in for 38 minutes of them just arguing about like whose sources are better. At that point, I'm like, well, that's a tough decision for me, a non-expert in the field, to make. So why don't we just call that a wash? Like, maybe it will happen, maybe it won't, and you just shift the focus over to something else that is more clearly on one side. Like, hey, maybe the economy will go up, maybe it'll go down. We have evidence on both sides, but you know, the only thing that, like, what we talk about, what they have nothing to say about, is the medical impacts or the whatever other impacts, right? Like environmental impacts. So you want to have more of a diversity so that in a situation where you both have cards for the same impact going in opposite directions, you can then stand out as having some other thing you collapse to that they have no way of capturing.
Income reduces poverty by 1.7%. Third is harming the unskilled labor market. Harrington of the Harvard Business Review 2013 explains, admitting more skilled immigrants in receiving countries reduces labor opportunities for skilled workers in the sending countries because the highly educated immigrants will not be around to start or manage businesses that would create demand for lower skilled workers. Thus, Brown of the World Bank in 2015 finds in a study of Mexico that high-skilled immigration reduced wages of low-skilled non-immigrants by 1%. Ultimately, the McKinsey Global Institute 2012 concludes that an inadequate supply of highly educated workers in India could keep millions of low-skilled workers trapped in urban poverty. And for all of these reasons, we urge you to vote con.
These are really talented students. I would be thrilled if I was working with them. With that said, I think, and I don't know to what degree it's the students, to what degree it's the coaches helping them. I don't know. I think these are very fine constructive speeches. They don't demonstrate a lot of strategy. They demonstrate skill, but that's different, right? Like, to use, I don't know, a sports analogy. I don't watch football, but where I imagine this being is like, yeah, you're really good at the plays that you're doing, but you don't really have any strategies in which plays you're picking and when and against which opponents and why. And none of the speeches really seem to anticipate what their opponents are going to say. I did say that the affirmative was a little defensive, but it didn't really answer anything, right? So it's not, the speeches don't seem to be written with the other side in mind, and they also don't seem to be written with the impacts in mind. They're not written with like, okay, well, what impacts are we trying to reach? How many, like what kinds? And then what are the cards we need to get there? It seems like they're just reading about H-1Bs and picking the biggest reason people are in favor of them, the biggest reason people are against them, and turning those into arguments and then just sort of tacking on an impact at the end. The problem is that's not really, like, the people who write about H-1Bs don't write in the language of debate. No one does research based on what the impact of a thing that doesn't happen will be. Like, I mean, very rarely do they do that, right? I mean, most research is based on measuring the present. So at the point where you're talking about a proposal, you can't just rely on what's being talked about, because no expert is like, what if we increased H-1Bs? Like, they're just talking about what is the effect we're seeing, and maybe we recommend it or don't recommend it. But my point being that the way I would write these cases is I'm thinking, okay, what are the impacts I like that I think make sense? We're talking about international relations. We're talking about, like, conflicts like Kashmir or whatever. We're talking about health crises, terrorism, the economy, the environment. And then I sort of just pick and choose which I think have the strongest links in this topic. And then from there, it's like, well, what's the strategy? How does this answer what they're gonna say? Or how does this outweigh? You know, this seems like you're just starting with the evidence and then tacking on impacts, which is fine, but it's just not very strategic. And in many formats of debate at high levels, just doesn't really stand much of a chance.
My first question is not actually a question. It's about...
That's a good fucking start, kid. I hate cross-ex questions that aren't questions, but I'm glad you're owning up to it. So
what happened last night in our Octas round with when Allen and Ahana conceded their chance to win TOC in order to have a much
we're talking
more
about
discussion.
some other thing. Okay, sure.
about gender disparities in debate and outside of debate. So I'm just taking the first 30 seconds of this crossfire to ask everyone in the room to please watch the round when it gets posted on PF videos, and also continue to have this discussion within your own teams and outside of it, because I really think it's an important issue.
Yeah, how about you take your prep time to do this instead of taking cross-ex time away from your opponents also? I understand what you're saying. I understand that it's important. But just seems like you're speaking for the other team, so.
To address the structural violence that goes on outside of the debate sphere, as well as the sex disparities that happen inside of the debate sphere. With that, Elisa, you can have the first question.
Thanks.
Cool. And with that said, yeah, I mean, it's less so in the world of debate that I exist in college community, in community college debate. But yeah, sexism is huge and it's shitty. And Paul's partner, Dallas, was one of, if not the best debaters in the country in their junior or senior year, and she went through a lot of that. And I have coached many, many women in community college debate. DVC's actually often had a majority female squad. I'm trying to do the math in my head. But yeah, they have to deal with shit that other people don't, and it's unfair bullshit. And I'm glad it's getting talked about. I just, I don't know, man. It's not like a spot. It's, it's not. I don't want it to be seen as an opportunity for a spotlight for people to go in and be like, I too understand that this thing is bad. It's not your cross-ex, dude. But all in all, kudos to you for saying something about it.
You're good. Let's talk about manufacturing. So, when IT workers come back to India, by your logic, how do those IT workers create demand for manufacturing if they're creating IT sector jobs?
Sure. So, the Kumar evidence is responsive in two ways. First of all, Kumar says that 61% of the workers who are coming back are offered higher level management positions, which in India creates new branches, which creates demand for lower level.
That's not the question. Those are management positions. The question is, how? I'm sure she's going to say
positions in IT sectors.
Yes.
How does that relate to
But
manufacturing?
Because when you produce more goods through innovating through entrepreneurs, which is the second part of Kumar that I was about to bring up, when innovators produce new products, someone needs to build those products, which means there's a...
Yeah, but how many products in IT are built in... I don't know what year this was. Last year? The year before? 2 years ago, maybe? I don't know. But, yeah, obviously that's the point of this. I don't even know which school is which. But, lady in the striped thing, good job. That's
shift from agriculture to manufacturing.
So it depends on these businesses creating sustainable products and new innovations within India.
Well, I would say first of all, if you're building new branches in Microsoft India, then you're still going to drive up demand.
The point you want to make is, what does IT stand for? Information technology? So what are they building?
For goods. But second is that if you're producing new small businesses, there's demand for manufacturing for those goods.
That question is also really good because the best thing you can do in cross-ex is force your opponent to answer questions that make them look dumb. Not that anyone in this debate is dumb, but asking them a question like, what does IT stand for? They say information technology, and you're like, so what do they build? I think puts them in a spot where they might be factually correct, and IT does lead to all sorts of innovation, but if you can get the judge to laugh, or at least in their head be like, oh shit, that's a huge rhetorical advantage against your opponent.
Means that you have more
okay, so just basically just creating the goods.
Yeah, you have goods. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you talk about how high skilled labor is flooding right now, right? So when 60%, the unemployment rate for STEM grads in India right now, what is it?
I have a feeling you're gonna tell.
I hate those questions. What? 30%? No. Oh, that's weird. I thought you were asking me. Yeah, dude, this guy's really bad at asking questions so far. Okay.
It's 60%. In the first 5 years after they graduate college, High-skilled Indians who have
yeah.
engineering degrees are unemployed 60% of the time.
Here's what
Well,
I
maybe it's because their would-be managers are in, I don't know, Palo Alto.
So at that point,
yeah. So here's
if
what I
you okay, sure you can go.
yeah. Here's what I would explain. I would say two things. First, I would say that that's because they're not getting the adequate training like within India that is needed to create new jobs. Ravi will get into this later, but we would tell you that in your world you exacerbate the incentives to get the wrong type of IT education. Second,
What do you mean the wrong type of
so
IT
like
education?
what I would tell you right now is because the United States has demand for Indian workers to come to the United States working in lower level IT jobs, they prevent India from pursuing higher level technology sectors
first I
such
would
as AI,
contest-
which is why there's such this large unemployment of these highly skilled workers because they're not being trained in appropriate areas. Can I ask you a question?
Wait 1 second. First, I would contest the idea that it's only low-skilled labor that's coming over to the United States.
No, I'm
Because-
not saying it's low skilled labor. I'm just saying it's
No, that
like
they're working
of the-
low-skilled jobs, right?
No, I'm not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the lower tail of the IT sector. It's not low skilled labor.
Wait, let me
It's
respond to
time.
that with a question, though.
But it's time. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's a shame.
Maybe we shouldn't have taken that 30 seconds. Okay.
There is higher.
Alright.
Let's start on this first argument. They say that brain drain is going to increase in the future because there is higher pay for Indians in America. The response is that we read you the statistic in case that 61% of Indians are able to find pay raises when they go back to India. However, the effect only compounds the longer we wait because we can see right now a huge boom in India's IT sector and their technology, which means each year that passes by, we're going to be seeing the gap between India and America closing, which is why we see more recently, we've seen a trend, according to the OECD, of more Indian immigrants moving back home. So in terms of the long term, we are going to be winning brain gain on that argument.
One, the sort of like, in public forum, people have this ability to, I'm just talking a lot of shit about public forum today. I don't know, maybe it's because I haven't eaten yet. People have the ability in many formats of debate across many ages to like sound like they're talking fast. But really, when you like think about it, like the words per minute are like very low. Like I'm sure I'm talking at a comparable rate right now in just this sentence, and I'm not sounding like I'm talking very quickly, and I'm not stressing my vocal cords or making a lot of pauses, and so I'm probably saying many more words per minute than this kid just did. But because they're kind of sounding really strained, and they trip over their words a lot, it actually makes it so that you're not getting a lot of words out. With that said, like what? 60%'s going back, so there's no brain drain? Alright, you only drain the 40%, but like, surely them all staying, or more people staying in the first place, right? Like the argument is that for every 10 extra people you send, India loses 4. So that seems like a net loss. I don't see how you can spin that evidence to say that like the brain drain isn't going to happen.
But then, more specifically, let's go down to this, like the entire 3 impacts. We're going to read one overarching response, and that's our brain gain convention is going to delink it. First of all, and most importantly, Kana 17 tells you that America is 4th in the entire world for developing human capital, whereas India rests at 103rd. What this means is that America is much better at developing skills for these Indians for when they return home. However, we would say that they're going to read this argument about how like India, like it's going to lead to a focus on like low-skilled labor, like they said in the crossfire when they come to America. We would contend that isn't true for 2 reasons. First of all, they're already working at very high tier like AI machine learning jobs. In fact, what the Pew Research Center found was that 75% of these H-1B workers are working at very high skilled jobs in America, some of the highest tier jobs in STEM degrees. Then, second of all, we would contend even that isn't true right now, it's going to get better in the future. The reason why is
one of the things that is really annoying about public forum not having like cited cards, like cut cards, is that now I don't know what that Pew Research actually said. Is it high skill or is it a high tier job for someone with a tech degree? Because a high skill job can still be an entry level job in tech, which is now another problem, another disparity in the debate. And so one might watch this debate and think, wow, this is a really good debate because they're going back and forth on a lot of stuff. But that indicates to me that, one, there wasn't a lot of strategy, because the whole point of the debate is to be able to collapse to certain things, to be able to be like, look, at the end of the day, this is the one most important issue, and we cleanly win it with no convincing responses. Neither side really gets to do that in this debate as far as I can foresee. And the other thing is, like, if there's a panel of 9 judges and they all have to make their own decision on which evidence they believe or don't believe, then the debaters didn't really do that convincing a job, right? So that's sort of the way I see this going right now. He's going to say this stuff about the brain drain, and they're going to say, no, that's, can we see the card? And but what do I know?
Biggest CNN reports is that Trump is cracking down on the use of H-1Bs to replace American workers, which is essentially when there's like lower skilled workers coming in. So we can see this year alone, there was a 45% increase in filings for increased evidence on H-1B applications, and moreover, IT applications for H-1Bs fell below the 10% mark for the first time. So we would say when they're coming here, they are working high-level jobs. However, even if that wasn't true, we would tell you even what's going on right now is good enough for brain gain. In fact, we can tell you, according to the OECD, we see that 50%
brain gain without people immigrating to India. Okay, that's fine. This is the buzzword. Sounded cool. Okay.
Of Indian software startups were started by Indians who emigrated to America and then went back home. The reason why brain gain is fundamentally important is because we tell you we're going to be creating more jobs in the long term. I'm going to get to that more later. So let's go to the first argument on FDI. 2 responses here. First of all, we would say that even if they stay in America, they're going to be increasing FDI. The reason why is because the PRI 2017 indicates that 52% of American entrepreneurs invest back into India after they have started companies. The reason why that's important is because 20% of Silicon Valley's companies are run by Indian immigrants. That's really important. We see the Indians make it large in America, then invest money back home. So in the long term, we're going to be winning FDI. Then, second of all, we can turn it with outsourcing because the vast majority of India's FDI is highly reliant on the outsourcing industry. However, outsourcing is direly hurt when H-1Bs are restricted. The reason why is because of what's called the onshore-offshore model. Essentially, what happens is that Indian outsourcing companies bring H-1B workers over to consult with American companies who then manage outsourcing teams back at home. However, these American companies would rather have somebody face-to-face, which is why the H-1B visa is so important for running the entire operation. That's why this, in the last few months, what CNN reported was that we saw the outsourcing companies were massively shocked by Trump's new rules, and we could see up to 200,000 jobs lost as a result of his one executive order restricting H-1B visas. So we would tell you that outsourcing is going to be decreasing, and we would see outsourcing increases in our world. Then, specifically, let's go into this argument on universities. So the reason we would turn this argument is because we can see right now that they talk about $2 billion being lost. However, what the World Global Bank indicates is that there are $55 billion in remittances alone, which means just remittances will be enough to solve back for that deficit. Then, second of all, we would argue that you're going to be increasing India's total STEM labor force. The reason why is because the PRI 17 indicates that when there's the chance of coming to America, more Indians want to major in STEM degrees. That's what we saw historically. There was a 21% increase in the size of India's IT labor force as a consequence of H-1B visas. So we're only going to be seeing the incentives go up. Then, third of all, on their argument on unskilled labor, the most important response is that the Wall Street Journal 2017 indicates that only 1 in 4 Indian STEM majors coming out of college right now can be employed. The reason why is because the labor market is so tight in India. The only way, so that's going to completely delink all their uniqueness on these people, because if they are leaving, somebody else would have replaced them, which means all the benefits are going to be the same in their entire case. However, on top of that, we turn the argument again, because 50% of entrepreneurship comes from Americans going back to India, so the only way to make sure there are more jobs being created is with brain gain, so we're going to be winning their case. We urge you to vote affirmative.
Bring me some prep time. Can we first see?
That was really boring, to be honest with you. Like, just none of it related to any. It's just like, okay, your warrants are wrong. Let me not challenge the warrants and where they come from. Let me just read you warrants against it. I'm like, well, I hope somebody brings something else up. Also, it was incredibly repetitive, right? Like, yes, people go back to India from the United States. They start businesses. You said it in the first speech. There's one extension. How does that take the whole speech? I don't know, but let's watch these people take their prep. I started doing a word search.
Oh, so bad.
Because I feel like I only needed to half listen to that. But, okay. Let's make something happen. Where's the magic? So I'm looking at the card with the thing, and now it's not the brain drain.
We used a total of 39 seconds. I'm going to respond to James' rebuttal and then go down their case. Is everyone ready? Yeah?
rebuttal, the first thing he says that the 61% get pay raise in India. That's not true. His card says that they get a higher level job, but if they're getting 16 times more than the wage of the U.S., I don't think they can prove it's a pay wage. Then they talk about how there's going to...
She's going a lot faster than he was, right? And you can tell she's not really straining herself all that visibly.
be a boom and the gap is closing. That contradicts at the end of the contention where they say a lot of people are unemployed. Make them pick one. Is the IT sector failing or like doing really well? Then they try to de-link because they say
make them pick one, but why don't you pick one, right? So in the scenario where they have two contradictory arguments, you need to say they've given up the grounds to pick which it is. I'm gonna say it's this one, right? At the point where you're saying like, oh, you're saying the IT sector is failing or blah, 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 like you need to figure out which helps your case. I would probably go with the, I don't know. At this point, like you've made it really confusing what you're actually defending, right? Because you have, you're not really defending the status quo. You're just saying like H-1Bs are bad, but H-1Bs are non-unique. Like, unless you're saying that, like, we should just let Trump get rid of them. I don't know. Like, the resolution doesn't say H-1Bs bad versus H-1Bs good. It's a... whatever. I'm repeating myself now also, so... I'm no better than these people.
That, like, India is at 103rd in terms of skill level, but the problem is, even if they're learning from skills, they're the wrong type of skills. They're learning IT, which they're at a
me, or is this
they need to shift
the
to
video?
AI, which Modi is already pushing for in India, but voting affirmative means that they want to be incentivized to go to the US.
Oh.
They're trained to incentivize them in basic level skills.
My
That's
lord.
from Q. It's not true because they're really high tier. High tier might mean programming, but it doesn't necessarily mean AI. They don't clarify the distinction. High tier is a really big term. Then they talk about better, like how it's like better because CNN says they're cracking down on low skilled labor. First, they like don't say 10%, 10,000. I would say just because it's not IT doesn't mean it's other.
All right, so the video cuts out, and like 20 minutes of just listening to a debate sounds rough. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to find the last cross-ex and then listen to those last speeches and then see how it'll go. I guess I'll make a prediction. My prediction is that in the cross-ex, they're just going to be arguing back and forth over this, like, will there be more jobs or less jobs? What about this? Is this something good? Is this something bad, right? Which would be a really good opportunity for one of them to have grounds the other person doesn't have access to, like the environment or whatever. Like, it's a major problem in many formats of debate that everyone picks something completely outside the main focus of the topic and is just like, this is how this leads to nuclear war. But with that having been said, like, you also want to find something outside of just... like, why would I want to watch two high schoolers argue about evidence for H-1B visas without being able to see that evidence myself, right? Like, the value of the debate is in framing which issues we should care about. And part of that is that it's hard to care about an issue that isn't true, but when you guys just de facto agree on the most important part of the debate, which is what are the most significant issues in the debate, then all I want to do is see your evidence, which I'm not allowed to do. So... Like in parliamentary debate where you don't have written evidence, you don't have cited like cards or whatever, a significant portion of it is about how you frame the issue, right? Like what impacts you're going for, what kind of situations you're talking about, what you're bringing into the debate, what is a stretch, what isn't a stretch. But in this, it's sort of like the worst of both worlds in that, no, it's an evidentiary format of debate and all anyone talks about is the evidence, but you don't get to see that evidence, and people have a really hard time refuting that evidence. So then I just hear like, the University of Nebraska whatever says this, and oh, that's not what so-and-so said in the University of... and then I'm like, oh, cool, like I get to decide who wins? I'll probably do it based on who did better in cross-ex. And then all the competitors do is complain that judges just pick whoever was the better speaker and whoever did better in cross-ex, while not acknowledging that you've given them no other clear way for them to make the decision. Anyway, let's see where they are.
Like, that's the question that you need before you increase the skill in order to have AI jobs in the first place. But then, extended PRI evidence that indicates that 52% of the people who go who stay in the United States.
Still talking about the 52% that stay in the United. Okay. Where are we at? Okay, I guess I have to predict who's gonna win this. I think if it's a panel, it's gonna be a split decision, first of all. I think all in all, the AF has the clearer story. Well, no. The neg is the clearer story. I just am not hearing them say, hey, if everything is so great, why increase it? But it seems like if it's a question of are H-1Bs good or are H-1Bs bad, the economy, like India isn't complaining about H-1Bs, so that seems like the way to go, but who knows? So I'm going to guess that the AF wins on a split decision, but let's see.
I'm going to start with our case in the top.
Positions, which is still going to be a free response.
So then, even if we're going to high skill positions, we're not.
So, like, we would say that you would just...
Okay, cool. Cross.
Yeah, your evidence...
Alright. I guess there's no reason for my face not to make up most of this. Oh, it's like way darker now. Let's just do this. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
You guys ready?
Hang on. So, let's talk about Trump. In general, do you think he likes low-skilled or high-skilled labor coming into the U.S.? So he's tracking down low-skilled labor.
Here's the problem. Because you guys lean into higher skilled labor, your evidence is not specific to AI.
Wait, what is high-skilled
Ours
labor?
says that the U.S. demand is not in AI. So even if you're going to other high-skilled...
Surprised? Yeah, surprise, surprise. They're just talking about what is or isn't high-skilled labor. Your evidence doesn't say this. Your evidence doesn't say that. Like, saw that coming a mile away.
Forces, you're never going into AI. Guys, you guys...
Your evidence does not say that. It says the previous companies were looking for low-skilled positions. In 2018, that changed when Trump changed the game by reducing low-skilled applications by 50%.
And even then,
No. We're not talking about low-skilled labor. We're talking about comparative within the IT sector. What is a low-skilled IT job compared to a high-skilled IT job?
Yeah.
We would say like within the technology sector overall, AI is at the higher end of the spectrum. Like the jobs that they're getting in the United States are on the lower end of the
Okay,
IT
wait,
sector.
so if you want to do AI, don't you need to... Can I put you...
Okay.
So, like, we would say that you would just represent as being good at coding, which a lot of these American high skill jobs give you too. It's not like you are the only human with the
Alright,
I said that in
talk about
something.
Wait, I'm sorry. What?
Yeah, you
Okay,
I said that in something.
okay. Here's the thing. Being good at coding doesn't magically make you able to do AI.
Wait,
I
no,
think
wait,
right
why
now-
not?
Our response.
Can we...
Our
can we-
response is that before you, like, our response is that before you become an AI coder, you need to learn basic coding.
Wait, so basic coding could, like, here's the thing. Basic coding is
These
already
people
in
don't.
your butt.
These people don't know basic coding, but people are flying them across the, like, planet to get these IT jobs.
What we say is, like, to get to AI, it takes more than just basic coding. That's the training
So
they're
it
not
takes
getting.
high-level
But
coding.
it's been a minute 30. Can you please ask the
Sure.
question? How much are these small businesses going to increase job positions for low-skilled workers?
They're going to drive poverty reduction.
Wait, so how much?
That's the driver of job growth. Why?
How much?
45% of manufacturing jobs, all like these tech jobs.
So I have a question about like the small businesses though. Like, can you please explain to me one skill that they're getting from the United States that they're then using within their small businesses to like create them? Like, what did they not have when they like
Yes.
before they can do it?
Yeah,
Now
because
what do
like,
they have now that
like,
something
management skills.
Yeah, so Mighty Option evidence that I extended is pretty
Management
explicit.
skills.
It says that they're gaining management skills, they're gaining new
Okay,
degrees,
so
they're
what-
gaining schooling.
Only learnable in one place.
On all three levels, you don't respond.
Okay.
I'm like not even sure what you're
Okay, that's not a very good response to a bad answer, but I'm leaning much more negative from this.
Yeah.
Could you please explain to me like the warrant? So is your warrant just for like the PRI analysis just that they have like business connections?
No, it's that once they become like high-level entrepreneurs in the U.S., they decide to invest back into India.
Okay, so that's okay. So it's relying on entrepreneurs, like H-1B people in the United States that then become entrepreneurs within the United States and
20% of
invest back
Silicon
in
Valley
India.
entrepreneurs were formerly H-1B visas.
Yeah, 20% of the entrepreneurs. There's like 500 entrepreneurs. Like, to say that X% of the people who survived were from India does not demonstrate what percent of Indians survived. Yeah, this is I'm leaning very hard negative now because I think the affirmative has just really mishandled some of the most basic things they had to demonstrate, and frankly, even in the last cross-X we watched, the negative's just better in cross-X. So I guess I can find out what happened somewhere.
Okay.
Or immigrant visas.
That's fine. Do you have a question for us?
No. We can do that.
Do you have a question for us? No. That's never a good sign. Always have a question. Somebody's like, do you have a question for us? And you're like, no. It's like, well, they lost.
Yeah.
All right.
However, we'll take that job and create a
Yeah. All right, let's see. Is there... Who wins? Millburn is pro, Whitman is con. Con wins 3-0. Yeah, that's not really a surprise with that cross-X. Okay. So what are the lessons in this debate? 1, be better at cross-X. 2, you need to demonstrate that the status quo is a try or die for the AF. In other words, the situation is bad enough that even if your evidence isn't very strong, we still have a reason to prefer making some sort of change, right? Even if the results aren't a guarantee, the risk is worth taking. The affirmative doesn't do that here. The other thing is just their evidence is like very clearly like tiptoeing around certain things, and of the people that made it, blah blah blah, and like, you know what skill they're missing is management, and they don't have any other way of getting that. And it just seems like the negative team does a better job of just pointing out all the problems I have with hearing the first AF speech. Now, with that said, I also have plenty of problems hearing the first negative speech that the affirmative isn't able to examine. So the cross-X and all of that is a major part of it, but another part of it is just that neither side has any unique offense. Both sides are just talking about the same offense, so then it just becomes who can talk about this one piece of offense, jobs, like the skill of the tech workers in India, right? At the point where you're making the defensive argument, in other words, the affirmative here is scared of the clash. They're scared that the other team's going to come up and say, well, what about the economy of India, right? And because of that, they try to just talk about the economy of India and use all of these weird spinning whatever tactics to try to argue how this helps India, and it doesn't work out for them. I mean, they made it to SEMS. I'm sure it worked out for them a few times, but it doesn't here. Whereas if they had just gone in and gone for whatever their actual strongest advocacy is, right? Even if it's like, look, this helps America. America is more important than India. I'm not saying I would make that argument, but I'm saying that if they made a convincing case of that argument, it would stand better, as it would stand a better chance in an impact comparison debate rather than just the, oh, I've agreed with you that in the H-1B debate, the most important thing is how this helps India, not Indian people who then moved to America, which was what the problem with the negative is, right? Like, why can't we be happy for these people who leave India? But no, let me just make the debate about how, like, there's a brain gain in India, and like there probably fucking isn't, right? Like, why would that be the case? So yeah, I guess coming out of listening to their rebuttals and whatever, it just sounded like it was going to be closer, but I think where it got mishandled was with writing the arguments top down, not bottom up. In other words, you're starting with the research and not with what impacts you're trying to hit. and also in just really not just being super defensive in the first speech ended up really hurting them, because being super defensive concedes what the most important impacts are, because you're talking about it too, right? So if you're like, actually, we help the economy of India, then you're conceding that the economy of India is what we should care about most. And unless you have a really open and shut case, like, you're probably not winning that head-to-head. Usually we have a preemptive, defensive-ish argument as our, like, second contention, or like our second DA, second advantage, because you want to create a wash. You want to say, hey, maybe that issue at the end of the day isn't a clear decision, but you know what else is this thing. But they didn't really have that. So they just created that clash and that confusion and that whatever, and then just lost because their story at the end of the day wasn't as clear. All in all, very talented people. Very, I'm sure they'll be good if they keep debating. Yeah, that's my takeaway from this. I don't know when we're going to make another one. Hopefully soon. We're on break. We got a long break. I got like 2-3 weeks of nothing to do. That's not even true. I'm trying to cut an RT. You don't want to hear about that. But I'm like 65 pages of script into this Reader's Theater. And it's a nightmare. But keep suggesting things for us to do, I don't know, what do you, analysis videos? Oh, also somebody asked me to, like, introduce myself, and I didn't. Is anyone still watching this? Probably stopped when the debate ended, right? Why are you still watching this? My name is Sasan Kisravi. I am a college debate coach who also does work, sometimes on a contract basis, sometimes not, for high schools, middle schools. I run Northern California's #1, the debate portion of Northern California's #1 forensics program overall. We don't have the best debate program in Northern California, but we're doing all right. I think we'll be pretty fucking close really soon. My partner in crime, Paul Villa, and I make videos intended to give high-level coaching and analysis and thoughts on debate to people who don't necessarily have access to that, in an attempt to bring more equity into the debate space. Catch you later.